Welcome to episode 43. Check out what's in store for you this week. At some point you just stop and be like, it's not enough.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do is enough to have remembered every little word that should have been where.
So anyway, that's a whole other story. But like
We'll get into the
whole
weeds
situation.
too quickly if we're left to ourselves. Yeah. These are scissors. You put your fingers in them and they cut things. Like
We are back, people, to the High Tech Podcast. Another week, another episode, more things to talk about, more technology, never gets old. You're joined by myself, Josh Swartz, one of the hosts, and then also the great Will Illingworth.
the great.
Over there. He's got some facial hair now. So, the more facial hair, the more great you get.
Okay, so just
Isn't
keep
that how that
going.
works?
I might be the best eventually.
Yeah, just keep going. So, welcome back, everybody, to another episode. We got some great stuff planned this week, and we're still going. Season 2 going strong, tons of good stuff. I'm excited for what's to come. Just wait, you guys, in a couple episodes. There's going to be some cool stuff, some series within the season. It's like podcastception.
Podception.
A little bit. Podception?
I'm
I don't know.
just excited, hopefully, to get through these next 5 episodes or whatever we've been working on, because we've been recording all over the place and my brain hurts. I'm tired of recording. We recorded episodes in the last week that won't air for 2 months, and I don't know what to do about it.
We have no idea what's going on. If we seem slightly confused when some of these episodes, it's because Will and I kind of forget what time we're in. So this is what I feel like time travel feels like, like on a very low scale.
Well, and it makes me
obviously without all the science.
It makes me have so much respect for J.R.R. Tolkien, Brandon Sanderson, some of these great writers, prolific authors who figured out a timeline, created worlds, wrote books across years and years. I was like, how the heck we can barely pull a podcast off over a couple of months.
I'm laughing because we're complaining about this right now, but somebody out there who's made a real movie is like, you idiots. This is literally what we do all the time.
Interstellar. How did they do Interstellar?
We literally recorded the last scene first. I don't know what you're complaining about. This is
The Witcher season 1, right? They ran 3 timelines at the same time, overlapping, but before and after each other.
Exactly. This is minor stuff. We need to get over it. Anyway, some great stuff to talk about this week, but before we do, our regular spiel of the High Tech Podcast, because we want to make sure we exist beyond just the episode you're listening to. So remember, check us out online. We have social media. You can check us out at Twitter. I said we have social media, and it makes it sound like we have a lot. It's really just Twitter.
Find us on this,
so go find us. Yeah, no, just Twitter. Go find us on Twitter at High Tech Podcast. We'd love, if you don't already, for you to follow us and subscribe to us. Check us out. We post stuff there sometimes, fun GIFs, fun memes, just fun stuff. We'd like to connect with you there. So make sure, find us on Twitter at High Tech Podcast. And then you can also message us at inbox at hightechpod.us. I've been doing a thing in some episodes recently where I ask people to send us a unique animal depending on the episode they've listened to. And so if you're listening to this one right now, I would like for you to send us a picture of a wombat. Okay? I want a wombat.
A wombat.
Yes.
I'm
mainly
not sure I know
because
what one of those looks like.
That's a good point, because I don't either. I just kind of picked literally it came to my mind. This was not planned out ahead of time. I was just I didn't pick an animal.
A wombat's not a Pokemon, right?
No, it's not a Pokemon. It's a real animal, I think.
Just asking for a friend.
I'm pretty sure. Google wombat and send us a picture to inbox at hightechpod.us. That's our email. And also, if you have any other fun things, or you're interested in talking about the podcast or ed tech or whatever it may be, this is a great place to find us and hit us up. And then finally, to find us anywhere else, you're already listening to us, so you've at least found us in some way. But if you don't already know, we have a website, hightechpod.us. So every episode that we release comes with an episode page. And for most of those episodes, there's resources, fun things there. So we just encourage you to check it out. We put some time into that stuff there, and it can help you get started with some of the apps we mentioned. So if you really like something we talk about in the podcast, check out our website, and you can find some more resources on how to use that app and get started with it right there. So anyway, with that said, that's all the fun stuff. The not fun stuff, the intro stuff, all that great stuff. What are logistics? What are we talking about this week, Will? I don't remember.
So
do you?
I had already scrolled down to the bottom of the page, and I almost read the wrong thing again for 3 episodes in a row.
Oh, man.
We today are talking about testing and how specifically do we test for learning, right? We've talked about quizzing. This isn't a necessarily like completely new topic, but like this exactly is something that is becoming more prevalent for me as I work in corporate now. But Josh and I have dealt with their entire career so far. Like testing is a big thing. Papers are tests, quizzes are tests, group projects are tests in some way, right? But we're talking about testing, through the quizzing tool for an exam. Like we want to really focus in on that and say like, how do we actually do that for learning? Like, is there a way that we do that that's not just maybe punitive or for compliance, but helps the student learn something, is going to reinforce what they've been getting in the rest of the classroom.
And for context, I mean, this topic came up between you and I as a topic to talk about, because like you mentioned, in your corporate world now that you've been working in, the special world over there in corporate, I don't know where I was going with that.
Cool.
It's, that's the last time I'll say
Thank
that.
you.
So anyway, you're coming across the quizzing thing a lot more. I mean, This is pretty prevalent in that area. In higher ed, I mean, it's not that it's not prevalent. I mean, it just depends on the topic. I think we definitely don't see it in our online courses that I've worked on quite as much. Because I think we have some education people that also try to avoid quizzes as much as possible. But we can't get around them. I mean, like any of the math courses we've designed, there's quizzes in those.
Right.
Language courses, like I would argue that for language courses, practice quizzes, things like that are actually really helpful if done correctly. But I've also seen some bad examples. So I don't think it's just in the corporate field we see this. Quizzes is used. Tests are used, obviously, in higher ed, and I think can be used poorly in some places, especially online quizzes. I think obviously we're kind of focusing on that space. Like, how do you do kind of the quizzes in the digital realm a little bit? But I think what we're talking about can apply to good old Scantrons and paper quizzes and whatever you're talking to. I don't know the last time I touched a Scantron, but I'm sure they're still out there.
And
they are.
More importantly, like who's still paying? It blew my mind when I found out, I think probably in my first year or two of working in higher education, that like that stuff is built on a subscription model too. Like I always just thought like you bought a machine, you bought cards, end of the day, right? But like I get it, if an entire institution's using them, people would subscribe to a company, and so you would get like a bundle of Scantrons every month, and then somebody would come out and like fix your Scantron machine once a semester. Like it was like a scanner copier, and I'm like, today, like I could never in my mind fathom paying for that service.
Oh yeah, I would never justify it anymore. I mean, like your LMSs come equipped with a lot of this stuff, but that's a whole nother topic. To the point of the quiz and test stuff, it's like how do we use this for learning? Because I'll be honest, I think the other piece of this conversation to keep in consideration is I made this joke, but I think in education especially, quizzes and tests get a bad rap sometimes. Like I feel like they're kind of treated like the low ball way of assessing, and like
and they kind of get paired up there. They get paired up there with lecture, right? Like they get beat up. Yeah. Like lecture isn't in itself bad. A little bit. Quizzes, tests are not in themselves bad. There's bad ways to do them. Just like PowerPoint, there's still people running around making PowerPoints like it's 1998. And I'm like,
what are you talking about? There's always great way. That's not true. That can't be true. There's no bad way to do a PowerPoint. I love my word art. No. But yeah, to your point, I feel like they get grouped into that no space in education, right? And like I don't think they're always bad. I think it's just that like when it comes to professors or instructors, and even I've been in this category, we don't always know how to use them well. And I think that's why we want to talk about kind of like how to do that with learning. So all that background I think kind of jumps in. So I think we're just gonna, we're gonna give our thoughts. We're gonna bounce around because that's what we do at the High Tech Podcast. We have very, very loose outlines that would be barely called an outline. So
we wrote one this week.
But
that's good.
Yeah, we wrote one this week. I think the big thing that's coming out in your and I's conversations before the episode, where like this concept of like compliance versus competency, right? So like, where I think our problem is a lot of times I feel like quizzes are used in a way of like punitive compliance, right? And so like, and that can take different forms. I've seen instructors who set up quizzes online where like the student just reports how much reading they've done down to the percentage.
I've seen them where it's just, did you read it? Like, yes, no, like
did
that's
you read
the quiz.
it? Yes or no? Like that's what the quiz has been used for. And it's like, okay, that's not assessing any competency. That's not assessing whether or not they actually read and understood what they read.
Right.
It's just assessing, did they read? And also, side note, and I talk about this with coworkers all the time, what student knows how to evaluate the percentage of reading they finished?
Right.
Like how do you do that? Okay,
Do
like
they
that's a
actually
whole
have
other
to
topic.
take-
But like just aside, yeah, like what would you do? You take the words or the paragraphs or the pages and you divide how many pages you read. But then at the same time, it's like we know what academic reading looks like. You don't always read every word on every page.
Right.
You focus in on the important stuff, especially when you have a ton of reading to do in a college program. Like, so anyway, that's a whole other story. But like,
We'll get
that
into the
whole
weeds
situation,
too quickly if we're left to ourselves.
that's what I've seen. And I've also seen that I think like the punitive things we've talked about, like to a certain extent, yes, like I want to quiz on terms and things that they know, and I want to make sure they understand them. But like, how do we, sometimes we set up our quizzes sometimes in ways that I feel like are just like, here, you have to know everything I've ever talked about, and I'm not going to tell you ahead of time what you're supposed to understand for the quiz. You're just supposed to guess. And then you're going to get this huge quiz that's worth, or final that's worth like your entire grade.
Yeah.
And let's see how you do. Like,
you
is that
remember,
really tested competency?
Do you remember like I think if I say this, you'll know who I'm talking about. Probably the hardest exams I ever took at our alma mater.
Oh, I know.
Right?
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Do you remember studying for those? Like, you'd pull the study guide out, you'd look through everything, you'd write down your own notes, and at some point you just stop and be like, it's not enough. There's nothing I can do is enough to have remembered every little word that should have been where, and you know, like, I just think that kind of level of
100%
of knowledge retention is it's such a high expectation that someone would get such minute details without any other structure, without any other scaffold to help you work on that content, right? I think, and to your point about language, right? I think language is such a good example of how it can work, because if you give folks a test on verb conjugations, or if you give folks a test on just vocabulary, right? Everything else you do in the course is using that vocabulary, is using that verb tense. Like, it's not like they're just using that alone. And then you get into one of these courses where, you know, it's a terminology dense or it's a fact dense course and examination practice, but then those facts are not used in anything else. Like, where is this body of water? Where did that tribe go? How many people were a part of this battle? Those are interesting, great facts. But if you only tested on that in the exam, it's so much less useful than maybe tying that into a narrative understanding of the concept, or having the student create a story about it as well, where they put a fictional character into that same area or timeline of life and give them life, or go through an experience as that character. Like, there's rich ways to experience those same facts without it literally just being a list on the wall. Yeah.
Well, and I think the other piece to this that I have the problem with is and it's not just like, this isn't professors' faults. I think this is just a thing we've seen through education, especially in higher ed. Like, where like there's this existence of this idea where like, I need to have this giant final at the end that they prep for, but then, and I've seen a lot of people do this well. Like, even the people that I would criticize in other areas of this, I've seen them do stuff like they have a bunch of quizzes throughout the course that build up to the information within this final, which is good. Like, I like that. But then we still see some of the people who are like, okay, here's like the 2 tests you have the entire class, and then there's nothing else like building up to that. In my mind, if I'm going to use like quiz and exam tools, I think to do it in a way that's not just for compliance to what it is, or like a punitive kind of thing, or just like I've proven that you know all these things by the end type of thing, is actually done in more smaller intervals to help them retain things so that they can better then pull that in to show competency and bring together complexity. And again, it depends on what you're teaching on, right? If I'm teaching on a language course where like they really are memorizing a lot of terms and conjugations and how things work together, a lot of, I think, practice quizzes and things, they can help build that knowledge base over time, and then connecting that into stuff they have to do, like speaking and sentences and things like that, is helpful. And I think that helps kind of show competency. And the quizzes should be, in my mind, not used in a way to say, oh, you know this for sure, but actually like a way to say like, okay, we're going to help you have a practical way of seeing like progress to how you learn.
Oh,
Not necessarily
yeah.
like you need to prep unknowingly for weeks for these quizzes or tests. And then like, this is the day you either know you've gotten it or not. We know that's not how learning works. Like you don't just like memorize everything and then just know it.
Yeah.
Like it over time you learn and progressively retain things. So like that's,
Well,
quizzes should fit that model. Like we should be using them as a tool to do that, as benchmarks, but ways that are, I think, more helpful for students.
it's no surprise, listeners, that Josh and I have a background in religion and theology. We both, have a certain flavor of that, and that's for our personal lives.
Yeah.
But we come out of that education space as well. So it's really interesting to me when we talk about like the impact of this quizzing, retention, learning practice. And then I think about like, where in my life has it gone well? And I actually think that Friday mornings, when I have breakfast with a couple of guys every Friday, and if we get talking about religion, philosophy, that's actually the hardest tests I've ever had in my life. Sitting there trying to answer questions for folks who might be 2 and 3 times my age about things that I've studied or about religion and stuff, stuff like that. And it's like, man, wait, do I have that fact right? Because I didn't keep all that information from the quizzes I took. That didn't sit with me. But the proof in that is having the ability, having the time to hold a conversation with someone else and teach them about it, help them come to some understanding on those subjects. That for me is a very rich example of how some of the lessons, some of the practices I went through in my undergrad really worked, really reinforced that information for me. Whereas if you asked me, how many people were involved in X war, I don't, it was on a test. It was on a test at one point, but I don't know the answer. And is it relevant?
That's the point. Yeah, like what's relevant, and also, let's be honest, that large test at the end of the course, just because they got a good grade on it does not mean they've retained and are going to remember. And what was the point?
That they could have that Friday morning conversation and answer the questions, right? So I feel like there's some things where I did well and got good information, and I can answer questions for people. But like you said, you could have somebody who could ace your course and ace all your quizzes and not be able to have that Friday morning breakfast conversation. Or an engineer, right? Not be able to go out and then engineer something. Like that's the point. You want people to not only go through your examinations, through your testing processes to show you something, right? This is that compliance element that we're talking about, but to be able to themselves hold competency. Like I think that a beautiful imaginative way to look at this would be like maybe tests and quizzes all through the end of the semester, but still the end is an oral exam. Like the final exam should be some sort of critical defense or presentation style where you have to show your chops. Like, did you get it? Did you actually understand the content from this course?
Well, again, I think it depends on what the course is. And I think at the end of the day, the answer for us is not as simple as like, okay, this is how you test for competency. Here are the like 5 ways you set up quizzes to do it. Like, it's not that simple. I think it's more of the question of, okay, what is the final goal? I know this sounds so crazy. What is the final goal of the course? What is the outcome? Okay. And then how can you leverage quizzing and this feature of being able to question-based assessment to build a knowledge that's necessary to get to something at the end that reaches that goal. So like, for instance, we've talked about our background in kind of religion, theology type of space of where we came out of in education. Like I could see like theology course building smaller quizzes to help students better understand the terms and what they mean, what that theological thought is, that builds slowly to more of like maybe, like you said, oral exam, or maybe like a quiz that has a more short essay responses towards the end, where you've got to be more using that terminology in expression of what you're talking about, an argumentative way, or whatever the goal is of the course. It varies on what you're looking at. But even like a history course, like, okay, if you want them to remember those names and places, why? Well, you want them to understand what happened in history. Okay, so like, if depending on what your goals are, I would probably do quizzes where maybe initially you're more focused on them trying to remember these terms, and it starts to build and scaffold up to more complex stuff where now they're having to actually like recite back like the effects of these events on people in history, like how this changed and impacted our history, like how World War II changed the economy. I don't like there's a lot of things you could go in different directions with that, I think.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think quizzes and tests should be seen as something building towards something, not a final death race to remembering everything that happened in the course. Because at the end of the day, I'm sorry, those super large finals you did at the end of the course, I'm not sure they helped me better remember what you talked about in the course. Even some of the crazier classes we've had where they were big finals, I'm not sure they really helped me deeply remember all the pieces. They gave me some of the groundwork that then when I wrote maybe more essays or looked more at the conversations in class, they helped me better understand. And I think that's okay to do stuff like that. Like, I liked the instructors who did quizzes that were to remember some of the topics based on what you read, like asking questions about the reading and how this would impact this before I came into class. So when I came into class, I was more prepped for the bigger conversation we were going to have.
Right.
Like, that type of stuff is helpful. But then I also remember quizzes that were like super lowball that basically asked the same 8 questions every time, and they were multiple choice, and I could answer them basically without actually reading and just looking up where things were. And should I have been doing that? Probably not. But you also left it easy for me to do it. Like, so
and this
again,
is where
it's not,
the goal of that assessment, though, Josh, is to like show compliance that you got to page 39 and show compliance that you got to page 52 and show that's where I think we tried to lead on the front with that comparison, compliance versus competency. We want folks to take quizzes to learn something, to become more competent. And so that's very easy to see in something like Duolingo and some of the language learning apps that are out there, because as you do more quiz questions, you move further in their progression theory. Like, you can't get to the end of a Duolingo course without answering every question. Yeah, like and it's going to take forever. And there's random questions, and it's auto generated. There's a lot of good content there. We may not be able to do that same scale in a single higher ed course, but I think that principle is the undercurrent of like a successful competency-based quizzing system. Lots of questions, frequently, all the time. You just need them to keep doing it. And when you have them do another assessment, for instance, like if they do a paper or if they have to do a project or if they have to create something, like you need to be using then those same keywords, terms, terminology, people as a part of those projects and assessments. Like if you do a whole thing on the different types of tanks from World War II, and that's the quizzes that they take from week to week, I know you'd like that.
We always come back to this.
If that's the bulk of the quizzing, then that next paper they do should have them investigate or tease out ideas about the types of tanks from World War II. Don't make them take that paper and write about the food deficits that the military suffered because of supply chain issues. Yes, that's the same issue, but if you're teaching about tanks, I feel like I've done so many courses where, yes, the food supply chain issue was something that happened in World War II, and the tanks was something that happened in World War II. But I can't study those in congruence, like, unless the tanks were what failed to bring the food in the supply chain. I don't know. Like, if you find that correlation, great. But
this tank class is my favorite. I love it. It's by the end of High Tech Podcast, there will be a tank class. Someone will be inspired, and they'll be like, there has to be a way to teach about tanks.
I bet you it's there. I bet you it exists.
Yes. It probably exists somewhere. We gotta look this up. If you know about a tank class, hit us up on Twitter or our email and let us know. I want to know, and I want to talk about it. Anyway, I think where it really comes down to what we're talking about is that I love your concept of like often and intentional quizzing and testing, and that it's not kind of like I think where our biggest problems have been is the courses that don't do it frequently. They're these giant tests that expect a student to remember all of these different multiple choice questions, and then somehow that's an argument you've remembered all those things.
Right.
We know that's not how retention works.
Right.
We know that what's really happening there is that they can remember that big scale things for that test, and then they're done, and half of it leaves their brain. Like, they don't remember half it. And that shouldn't be our goal. Like, why is that what we're going for?
To dump as much in so that more dumps out. Like,
but that's ridiculous. So, like, we need to be thinking about how can we use these exams or quizzes as tools to help build competency over time, building up to something bigger, whatever that goal may be for the course. I think like that's how I would sum up where I think quizzes can be used well. And that's why I think we often hear in language courses they work so well, because it's more obvious. It's more obvious that like I'm building up these terms and language to get somewhere with the language. And so that's why Duolingo does it really well. But I don't think it has to just be language courses. I think there's a lot of ways that we could use those more intentionally. Now, I think before we move on to a bunch of stuff, I want to get to a couple of practical examples I think you threw up.
Yeah.
Because we do have some stuff that I think you can generally take as a practice when you're designing a quiz or exam that'll help. So I'll throw in this first one I think we had in here because I love this and I want to use more of them. And if I had more of my daily work being in designing stuff right now, I would try to find places for them. But I love online quizzes for scenarios. Like quizzing can be really cool for scenarios. Like my immediate thought was like, thinking of, and this for me it always comes back to like counseling courses, because like I think they should use more scenario quizzes than they actually do in online counseling courses. But like building up some quizzes initially, I think, to like get some terminology, what you should be doing, and then developing that a step farther to say like, okay, what if I use this quiz not just as a tool with multiple choice, but they're actually presented scenarios, and based on how they respond, they get certain feedback. That would be incredible. Like that uses a method to kind of literally give them options and they have to choose, and they're getting feedback back, and that feedback is helping also train them in what you want, which is kind of the murkiness sometimes and the ways that we should be handling questions. And that's real life. That's a simulated version of what they're going to get in real life, which is they're going to be presented with a scenario, have to make a choice, and something's going to happen because of that choice. Yeah. And so like those simulated quizzes, I think, are a great way to use it. So if you can find places, it doesn't have to just be in counseling. I think there's other places.
Well, I saw
theology courses, simulated quizzes would be great.
I saw some in the criminal justice space. It was a Qualtrics survey. They use conditional formatting that, again, if you pick this, it took you to that. If you pick this, it took you to that. And it's then a decision tree, right? If I do this, yes or no. If I do this, yes or no. And based on every yes and no, you get different feedback. And I think you're right. Yeah. That's a really powerful thing. One
side note, in corporate, that would be a much better way to deal with quizzes in most cases than what they actually end up doing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Did you
like simulation based on the things they learned?
Right. I would love that. So that's a positive. That's a like, hey, try this, create scenarios. And some folks, might be a little, what's the word? Like a little scared of it or a little uncertain if that's like a lot of work or not sure how to start. You can do it very linearly with just 10 questions, right? The thing being that you might not get as much like customization, but just do 10 question quiz, and based on each question they have to respond to smaller scenarios. They don't have to be one global scenario. It's great to have a big narrative like that, but each question can be its own scenario. I've answered hundreds of those in my education career. That's a positive suggestion. Something that I want to encourage you to, if you're working on tests, just in general, avoid the all of the above bias. If I see an all of the above, I assume it's correct. And so I spend more time, this is me, but it's also pretty well proved in like testing science. If I spend more time trying to disprove the all of the above or like find some way it shouldn't be that, than I do thinking about answering the question. Like I go like, oh, all of the above? Well, if it's C, is that all of the above? Well, if it's B, is it like, no, don't worry about it being all of the above or not. I want them to know, did FDR say that? Or did JFK say that? Or did somebody else say that, right? Like I need to have that information. Don't kind of give them that like knee-jerk response. And you will have students that just click all the above because they assume on some percentage, right? 60, 70, 80% of the time, that's going to be the right answer. So why take time in testing skills? Why should a student take time on any questions that say all the above when they could have a high percentage of getting that right just by clicking it? So that's one of those pitfalls. Like it's easy. We think that that's a great thing to ask all those, you're going to capture all that information in one all the above, but it actually doesn't. They don't focus on A, B, and C then. All they do is click D.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. I think the more you can push on that, the better. And that also allows you then to do stuff like we'll often have problems with people running LMSs where they do like all the above and then they try to like randomize
Right.
the things, and then all of a sudden all of the above is literally nothing.
Instead of
because
asking,
it's the top
well,
one.
but then they have to write like all of the other answers, and it's like,
Yeah,
really?
all of the
Are you
other.
gonna-
Yeah, it's like
that's-
we'll like just come up with better
Right.
like options.
and it's not wrong to, it's kind of easy. Like, oh, if I write in all the above, I can do one question. Write 3 questions. If you want those 3 things to be answers to a question, write that question differently and give each of those answers. Let them take the time to differentiate that correct answer from wrong answers. That's the goal of that kind of testing. Don't let them get by on chance and bias. That's not the goal.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I would add in my list on this before we move on to some other stuff is where you can provide feedback as much as possible.
Yeah.
Like, this is often skipped over, but the world of online quizzing and online testing especially has opened a door for this, where you can provide instant feedback on multiple choice questions and true and false questions, and there's such a power to doing that because it allows for good stuff, like instant feedback for students to be able to understand why something wasn't right or wrong.
Yeah.
And it depends on how you want to do that. There's a lot of options where you can do it instantly in the quiz. I like doing it that way, but there's also, if you want them to get done with the whole quiz ahead of time, you can let them do that and then have an option where they see feedback at the end of why they didn't get certain answers right. Like, there's a lot of different options in LMSs that you can use. Obviously, we're more familiar with how Canvas does it or Schoology because of our backgrounds, but I know Blackboard has similar methods.
If you're not
so
big
does a
on
lot
your
of the other
LMS,
LMSs out there.
or if you're not like, in that tech regards, just like make a Word document and email that to the class afterwards. Like,
yeah.
And if you're concerned, well, is that going to get around? Don't put the answers in then. Put the feedback on
provide
question.
feedback.
Put question 1. Like, you can put all the questions. People are going to give that on Chegg anyways. Like, get over that. That's going to happen. But put rationale or put descriptors about each question. They don't have to have the answer in them. Just give them more information that will help them get the answer. Like, there's more than one way to give feedback, to have students use that feedback, and to make a test evergreen, so you don't have your answer sheet getting out there.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Now,
feedback does not always mean right answer.
Yeah. with all this, I really feel like some of it's new, some of it's like conceptual stuff with technology that we just haven't had access to, randomization and things like that with Scantron. Until we got to digital context, like, we didn't have as many functional options. But even this modern stuff needs to be paired with that old stuff. Like, Socrates was great for a reason. He has philosophy at its core, at its root, and he taught us so much. Ancient knowledge should not be forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for sure. I mean, like, the Socratic method, or could be said to be one of those methods that we use
when we're working with questions,
even in the midst. Yeah, even when we're working with questions.
Yeah.
Which is weird because it brings to mind, Will, a tool that I know.
What tool is that?
Yeah, like the tool that I've looked at before. It's called Socrative.
Oh,
I think. Right?
Wow!
Have you heard of this one?
What a coinky dink!
What a weird scenario that we've come
Ever
into.
could we transition like that?
We should probably talk about it since it seems to tie to what we're talking. Okay, so like, obviously this is our app for today, but I would throw this out here. What we're about to recommend, if you have an LMS at your institution or where you work at that does quizzing, like, you just use that tool. The amount of times I've had instructors go, I want to use this quizzing tool, and I go, what does it do? And they explain it to me, and I go, yeah, but Canvas does that.
Right.
And they go, yeah, but it does it the better. And I go, how much better can it do the multiple choice option? Like, what is does it
prove it to me? Like, show your work.
Prove it to me. Does it answer it for them? Like, is that what that? I don't understand. So anyway, that's my plug. Make sure you use your tools, your LMS, because it's just going to be good. But some people are in situations they don't have that.
Right.
Like, they don't have those standard tools.
Well, and like, one thing that happens to
an
an adjunct, here's something that I would give as a really good example of why you might use something like Socrative, right? If you're an adjunct, or if you're even an instructor who's teaching at another school, like people do residencies and things like that, you might not have access to your materials or to bring them to the other school, or like an adjunct, you might not work in just one LMS. So I can see,
No, that's true.
I can see
That's a good
where
point.
like there's a reason you'd want to have these kinds of quizzes and things in a third party, where as an adjunct, I could use the same quizzes at all the schools I'm teaching. You know what I mean? That would be a really valuable tool. But also Socrative and a lot of these modern quizzing tools, like even some of the features in Nearpod, the ideas behind them now are just kind of get the students doing them outside of the classroom more frequently. So some of them gamify it, or they have fun music like Kahoot, if you consider that fun, whatever, you know, like it's stuff that's accessible to the student outside the classroom and gets them maybe on their phone to do it, or they have to do live reactions during class. Like I can see where this might pair alongside of an LMS exam or something like that. But I agree with Josh's sentiment. Like start with your LMS's quizzes, because it's a really good thing to just keep using for free. You don't have to pay something more or be worried about another technical barrier for your students.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that said, Socrative is a great solution. I think we've thrown out other solutions that do that type of thing in a quizzing type of feature, but Socrative is kind of more of a formal, I think, quizzing tool.
Right. This is the
which
one
is why
thing
I would throw
it
this
does.
out if you're looking for a tool. So talk about Socrative just a little bit. So the features, it's not going to take too long to talk about them, because it's like it's a quiz. So they allow for. Now I don't know what the pro plans look like. I know there's a little bit more. So just like a note, Socrative is a freemium tool. So there's a free version. So Will and I are in that version right now. And in that free version, you get like, they call it a room, but it's basically like, I think it's the equivalent of like a class. Like you can put people into this and give quizzes to them. You get 50 students per room that you can put it into, and you can create up to 5 quizzes on it. So you can't create like a massive library in the free version. Now I will say some of this is, you can export stuff as PDFs out of here when you create stuff.
Right.
And
You
like
could
that,
you could import export and make it work.
Yes. But anyway, so you can create quizzes in there, and in the free version, you get real basic. I mean, you can basically make multiple choice, true and false, and like short answer. Which I would argue for most quizzes, you can get the work done with those 3 options. Yeah. Like that's the majority of what people have used in courses I've helped design and worked on and seen. So that gives you a lot. Now in the paid versions, then they do have deals. Now this is where the tools, it's definitely a freemium tool. You can get pro for as a K-12 teacher for like $90 a year. If you're in higher ed, like those that we're mostly talking to, the pro is like a higher ed and a corporate. They kind of put those two together because obviously we're so the same. But that's like $180 a year, which seems like a lot, but you get 200 students in there, and you get 20 different rooms that you can do stuff, and a ton of activities and quizzes all at the same time. So they have features depending on if you're going to use this a ton for yourself that you could get into, and then free if you're just looking to make a couple quizzes that you can share with people online and kind of recycle content.
What I think they're
so I think
assuming,
they've got some options.
They're
there.
assuming of that higher ed account too is like big universities. You know, like I think they're thinking that you're going to be a teacher of 100 students or 200 students. I bet you if you got on chat and explained like, hey, I have a class of 45 students, I just need more features, like I would go ask for a cheaper account. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if they would or they wouldn't, but it's worth saying like, hey, I don't teach 200 students. I don't have, 6 classes, but I want more. I bet you they could find something in the middle there, because I've asked companies before for cheaper or easier, smaller accounts or limited accounts, and they want your money. At the end of the day, they're going to try and get your money one way or the other.
Yeah, there's ways to figure it out. But either way, with the free version, you can create quizzes with multiple choice, short answer, and true and false questions. And you can share those through a URL with your students, and then they can take those quizzes. So it's fairly easy to do. And I think that's why I like Socrative. It's a pretty... honestly, it's a pretty easy tool to use. Like we've been in here for just a little bit creating some stuff, and it's not that difficult to build some stuff out in Socrative. And what I like about Socrative, while it's freemium, it's been around forever. I mean, the tool's been in this world for a good bit.
Yeah.
So I'm not like concerned about sketchiness and stuff like that. And they work a lot with K-12, so they take into consideration like FERPA and grading concerns. So like the tool is pretty solid in that respect. yeah, I think it's a cool tool. I wish I could say a ton of super fancy things, but it's a quiz tool, guys. It's
It does it.
It does quizzing. You can add images in there. It's pretty simple. It's not too crazy. I think if you're looking to get started with something and you don't have access to something already, this is a good tool to try mess around with creating some digital quiz content.
To sum up this conversation, these are scissors. You put your fingers in them and they cut things. Like that's
this is not
Socrative.
It's not like some of our other fancy tools where we have to really describe it. It's a quiz. It quizzes things. That's what it does. Yeah, but I will say what I like about it too, just a note, is that anytime I'm looking for a quiz tool alternative to what we have, I want to have feedback options, and I think that's Socrative does. So you do have options for providing feedback based on answers.
Right.
So that was my only other plug.
Yeah,
it's a scissors with a good handle.
It can be held right and left-handed. There we go.
Yes, it can be both options. So yeah, give it a try. Check it out. Just Socrative.com. You'll get there. You can log in. Our resource page at our website. We'll talk about it a little bit more, I think. That's all I got.
Love it.
I really don't have much more to add to that conversation.
Love it. Well, hey, hope give us some feedback too. Hit us up in inbox at hightechpod.us or at High Tech Podcast if you've used it, if you have insights on it, if you have other recommendations or reviews or templates, anything that would be good for the community. We want to make sure we're sharing that. Next episode 44. We are hosting our second guest of season 2. We're very excited for this conversation. It's going to be on VR for education. And we're going to talk about the app Sync Sketch with a good friend of ours, Chris Morris. So we really hope you tune in. We had a lot of fun with this one. And just like future think, like VR for education. Yeah. What?
I feel like I've traveled in time in that episode. I'm excited for that conversation. Like high tech really got high tech. We got really techie.
We went there finally.
Conversation. We went there.
Which is perfect.
This is no quiz tool, folks. This is VR.
This episode is how to use scissors, and that episode is what are lasers.
This is how to use lightsabers.
Yes.
Like that's
yes.
Put it in context.
I love it. Until that episode, make sure you find us at hightechpod.us. Share us with friends there. Look at our episodes, past episodes. All of our content there is available to help you get started with any of the apps and things that we've talked about over the year now. Really appreciate it. But until our next episode, see ya.
See ya.
I totally forgot the tagline.